Item, Charles Gardner.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for convening this panel. It's good to see you all again. I wanted to just brief you on work that we've been doing on this subject. Stakeholders came to us at least a year ago and said there really isn't a good forum for having this conversation.
Who is we?
Sorry, Delta Vision Foundation.
Thanks.
Charles Gardner, Delta Vision. Over the last several months, we've convened discussions with many of the people that are on your panels today, but also the environmental community and the business community, to look at this issue of how do we advance storage. Today's discussion, I think, highlighted virtually all of the major impediments to improving storage. We are close to, we should have in the next week or two, a policy paper that comes out of this work group that is particularly focused on how do we advance storage of all types, which I think is of broad interest. So let me just give you a couple of highlights from that. The first is that we identified both an operating objective and an implementation objective. The operating objective is to capture more water when it's abundant and divert less when it's dry, to reduce the conflicts at critical times for fish and other ecosystem needs. That's something that's clearly in the Delta Plan. It's an important part of achieving the co-equal goals. The implementation objective is to implement additional new storage upstream of the Delta and accessible dry year storage and groundwater supplies downstream of the Delta by the time any new conveyance comes online. So we tried to set a specific target for moving these things forward. There are 3 or 4 things that have come out of the discussions, which I think build on the discussions that you heard today, and key needs in terms of advancing storage. The first is from an analysis standpoint. I think you heard both from Jason, the federal perspective, but also from the last panel, the need for analysis at the regional level to figure out how these projects can really work and how they'd be paid for. Ron Jacobs, who's Mario's boss, termed it a viability analysis, which I think is a good term. It's really getting at the negotiation of how would this actually be paid for. There's another type of analysis that is really missing as well, and that's an integrated system-wide analysis. And by integrated, I mean integrating surface storage, conveyance, and groundwater. And there is some preliminary work that's started. I think that you'll see a report in the next month or two that started to look at, if we add storage, both surface and groundwater, both upstream and downstream of the Delta, what benefits can be achieved. There really hasn't been a broad interconnected evaluation of that from a system perspective. Some of these regional folks are starting to do it, but we really need the capacity to do that to determine particularly how can storage benefit the Delta. So that's one thing that you'll see in our policy paper. From an institutional standpoint, and this is an area that doesn't get talked about very much, is that there are some real institutional barriers. We certainly talked today about the need for regions to come together, and you've seen folks ready to do that. I think that has to come with some empowerment and support from the state and federal governments. I think we heard some discussion of that today, but I think there can be more to give the regions the authority to do these kinds of analyses and really work through what's needed. And I think there's some progress on that, but there could be more. The second concept, which I think you talked about indirectly today, is that the way we're going to develop storage is a negotiation of public benefits and user benefits. And currently, we don't have an active party on the public benefit side. The Water Commission is doing great work thinking about how do we pay for storage. But we need more involvement from a planning standpoint in those negotiations of how does this project really going to work. We need the resource agencies and others to be at the table essentially negotiating their piece of the storage. And I think that institutionally would really advance the conversation so that we're not doing the bring me a rock approach for the public benefits, but there's actually people there saying, here's the priority for public benefits and state investment in those or federal investment in them. On the funding side, you heard a lot of discussion about the bond, the importance of that. Our group certainly shares that view. I think there's also a need for immediate funding. The group is looking at the immediate drought funds to do some of this analysis that could advance the conversation. So I think there's some immediate needs now, and then the bond obviously being an important part for future funding. And the last thing that I'll mention in the paper is that we have specifically acknowledged the importance of performance accountability. And I think that's particularly true is performance accountability to what benefits does it provide to the Delta. Currently we envision working with the Stewardship Council and others, the Implementation Committee, to implement some appropriate performance accountability to advance storage. In fact, I think this work group process that we've initiated is desperately needed to continue. It could continue effectively within the framework of the Implementation Committee to be the vehicle to bring the agencies that you had on some panels and the stakeholders you had on other panels together into this essentially negotiation and analysis that needs to move forward pretty quickly over the next 18 to 24 months. So again, sorry we didn't have the paper done for today, but we'll certainly come brief you when we have it ready in the next week or two. And again, thank you for the conversation today. I think it was useful to highlight some of the challenges, and we've been working pretty hard to find ways to overcome those challenges and really develop some storage that can contribute and achieve the co-equal goals.
Great. Thanks, Charles.